Kuzuzampo, and a very good evening to all of you. My name is Karma Dendrup, and I'll be your MC for the duration of this talk. As Buddhists, we can all agree that there are no coincidences and that it is our karmic connection that has brought us all together here tonight. And this is just our karma coming to fruition. And it gives me great joy to be present here and to have this opportunity. The topic of the talk tonight is Buddhism between Devotionalism and Rationalism. To speak on this intriguing topic, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you Professor Dr. Dorji Wangchuk. While the evening could easily pass by, should I speak in detail about Doctor and his work, I will refrain and briefly introduce Doctor to you. After completing a 9-year course in the study of Tibetan Buddhism from a traditional Tibetan Buddhist monastic seminary in South India, the Ngajur Tholop Donga Rigpi Junye at Mysore, Professor Dorji Wangchuk studied classical Indology, which was his first major, with a focus on Buddhist studies. And his second major was in Tibetology at the University of Hamburg, and this was in 2002. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on the resolve to become a Buddha, a study of the bodhicitta concept in Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, and received his PhD from the same university in 2005. Between 1992 and 1996, Professor has taught Tibetan Buddhist monks and nuns in monastic seminaries in India. Since 1998, he has been teaching and researching at the University of Hamburg in various capacities. He also taught a term each at the University of Copenhagen and McGill University. Currently, he is a professor for Tibetology at the Department of Indian and Tibetan Studies, Asia-Africa Institute, Faculty of Humanities, University of Hamburg. His main teaching and research interests lie in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, Tibetan intellectual history, and history of ideas and Tibetan Buddhist intellectual, literary, textual culture. Currently, he is working on the perception and reception of Yogacara in Tibet and on the identity, superiority, and authenticity issues of the Vidya Dhara Pitaka in Tibetan Buddhism. I would like to add that Professor is the first Bhutanese to be working as a full-fledged professor in the West.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the Dasang Tsula office and the Department of Youth and Sports for arranging this event. And I would also like to thank every one of you for coming to this event, to this evening. It was a rather short notice, but still, despite your family obligations and maybe hard days' work, you came to this event, and I hope that I won't disappoint you. Actually, as a Bhutanese, I feel a bit awkward to speak in English, but I still hope and wish and hope that our command of Chöke would be good enough in the future, that we can communicate, we can talk about Chö in Chöke or Dzongkha. But of course, I must admit that my Dzongkha is very rusty, and of course I would rather prefer to talk in English. You may wonder why I chose to talk about Buddhism between devotionalism and rationalism. For some reason, I have a feeling that there is sort of a gap between let us say, traditionality or traditional scholars and modern educated, those of us who are educated in a secular education system. And I thought that there is a need for better communication, there's a need for better cooperation. And I also want to address that this sort of a tension between two poles is actually not new to our Bhutanese society, but rather I would try to show in course of my talk, the history of Buddhism seems to have always experienced sort of a tension between, on the one hand, what I call people who are faith-oriented, who are devoted, or who are more focused on devotionalism, and there is other extreme form or section of Buddhist scholars and Buddhists who are not satisfied by simply faith or devotion, but rather who would like to stress or emphasize on the rational aspect of Buddhism. Actually, I would also like to say a few things with regard to the mode of presentation. Actually, I don't like to give a frontal sort of a lecture or talk. and I don't know how successful I would be. Actually, I would like you to participate. And I would very much welcome your questions, protests, or kind of if there is a need for clarification, just please let me know. And I want you to get involved in our today's presentation. So if there is something unclear or you think that something needs to be clarified, I would prefer that you on the spot try to clarify that. And also, I must also admit that I take this advantage to talk a Bhutanese educated audience without really preparing a formal talk with everything ready. Usually I dare not do this in an international conference, and I'm always I usually read out my paper, and I think I take advantage of you being Bhutanese and I being Bhutanese, so I feel somewhat at home, and I simply chose to, so to say, talk without well-crafted or drafted paper. Now, coming back to my topic, Buddhism between devotionalism and rationalism. First of all, I think it is quite legitimate to ask ourselves, how do you understand Buddhism? Or how do Buddhist scholars in East and West understand Buddhism? And of course, we know that I think it is clear to most of us that people in the East and the West have always asked, what is Buddhism? And some people have suggested that Buddhism is actually not religion. It is philosophy. It's a philosophy of life. And of course, hardcore philosophers, they would not accept that Buddhism is philosophy. In fact, they think that, I remember when in one of my classes, my German professor said that when he was a student, there was a lecture by an East European scholar, and he said, philosophy is philosophy only in Hegelian sense. It's like all the rest are not philosophy. In that case, of course, Buddhism doesn't qualify to be a philosophy at all. When we started going to school, I remember looking up a dictionary and to see how is religion defined. I'm sure most of you may have done that as well. And if you look up a simple dictionary, you would realize that actually religion in very old dictionaries is often defined along the theistic lines. That means you have to believe religion is a system of belief which is rooted or based on the belief in God or the Creator God. If you define religion in this sense, of course, Buddhism is not a religion, because Buddhism does not believe or presuppose an existence of a Creator God. Maybe this has to be distinguished slightly, because Buddhism may believe, or Buddhism does accept existence of gods or celestial beings, to differentiate between God written in big capitalized G and simply gods as celestial being. Just as Buddhism accepts the existence of human beings, Buddhism also does accept the existence of celestial beings, and these are gods. But I think Buddhism, it would be wrong to say that Buddhism does believe in a Creator God. So if we define religion along the lines of a Creator God, then Buddhism is not a religion. People have said, Buddhism is not religion, it is science. In fact, I think some of our leading contemporary Buddhist masters have said that Buddhism is the science of the mind, right? Maybe we have to see this point slightly in a differentiated and a nuanced way. Of course, I think every religion would like to claim that it is somehow scientific. I think we Buddhists should not also make the same mistake and lay claims of scientific nature of Buddhism, because Buddhism is an old system of belief or doctrine, and science is rather late. And science you can always revise, modify. You can come forward, we can modify our thesis, hypothesis. But usually religions, they have a set of dogmas or doctrines that you usually just simply cannot go on changing as we go on. So, in other words, just to summarize the question, is Buddhism religion? Then we may have to say it depends on the definition of religion. I think nowadays, religion, now if we look up in a very detailed modern English dictionary, we would realize that religion is no longer defined only along the lines of theistic sort of thoughts, but rather we'll see that religion is somehow connected or associated with the belief that our human life or existence is not the only form of life or only existence. There is something after death. And also there is something better to hope for. That means our existence is not only the only existence, not even the best one. We hope religion is a system of belief that somehow expect that there is something more to our current existence, more than our current existence. In Buddhism too, in fact, we think of, even if we are not particularly religious, I think we believe that we hope that there will be a better existence in the future, not even a nirvanic sort of a state, but rather a better existence as a human being or even on a celestial realm. So I think if we understand, if we define religion broadly, indeed Buddhism is a religion. This is what I wanted to say. And is Buddhism philosophy? I would like to address this somewhat in detail. In order to answer this question, I think we have to first see how philosophy is defined. And if you understand, philosophy is kind of an underlying thought or idea, kind of a reflected attempt at explanation of the phenomena or the world. Just like in normal everyday usage, you say, this is the philosophy of my life. We just simply use it in a rather loose fashion, right? I think in this case, indeed, Buddhism is a philosophy. But of course, Buddhism is not philosophy only in a sense of Hegelian philosophy. It's much more than that. There are ethics. Buddhism does have the idea of reality. Yeah? What is real? What exists? How do we know what it exists, and so on. So to say, ontology. To use the German word Sein, like what is there, and how do we know that something is there? That would be epistemology. That is theory of knowledge. So if you consider these elements, indeed, Buddhism, let us say, Buddhism has many philosophical aspects. But of course, we have to ask, because as you pointed it out, that I'm interested in the history of ideas. And I consider myself as a student of history of ideas, mostly connected with Buddhist culture. And indeed, one of the questions that most scholars of Buddhism would ask is, nowadays, when we read a Buddhist work, or as a technical work, or a philosophical work, or religious work, we'd often see that, okay, Buddha taught this, Buddha said this. What teachings can we really attribute to the Buddha, historical Buddha? In other words, what are the earliest forms of teachings that we can reasonably attribute to the historical Buddha? I think this question is very much debated and disputed. Scholars also dispute not only what are the earliest form of Buddhist teachings, but rather how do we determine that? They debate in the methodology, how to find out what is the earliest layers or the strata of Buddhist teachings. My German professor, he has devoted, I think, quite a bit of his time and energy in trying to answer some of the questions, because we cannot deny, like if you look at Jendu Chokni, right, those so-called 6 ornaments of the world, like Nagarjuna, Asanga, and we have like philosophers like Shantideva and so many important thinkers in Indian Buddhism, particularly people like scholars such as Chandakirti and Dharmakirti, Chukidrakpa. These are really thinkers. They're the hardcore, one might say these people look like hardcore philosophers. So we cannot deny that Buddhism, as we know today, indeed have so many philosophical aspects. But the question really is, can we attribute all of these philosophies to the historical Buddha himself? So, of course, we coming from the tradition, let us say Buddhist tradition, we would not perhaps pose this question. It is not necessary to pose such questions. But as a student of the history of ideas, one would like to pose this question. So, in order to explain such questions, my German teacher, he wrote several articles, and one of his concerns is, how do we explain the development of Buddhist philosophy that we know today? How can we account for the development of Buddhist philosophy? And why did it develop? So, I think in two groundbreaking articles, he tried to answer this question. And he first of all said, we cannot deny that the historical Buddha was categorically and consistently against pure speculative philosophies. Like, does our world come to an end? Does it have an end? Does it have a beginning? What happens once the Tathagata dies? And all of these are philosophical questions, but purely speculative. Buddha, the historical Buddha, according to the sources, have not encouraged such questions. He refused to answer these questions. And he said, this is interestingly, he did this not on one occasion, but consistently and categorically. Why? According to the sources, for the Buddha, the pure speculative questions, philosophies, is irrelevant. It is irrelevant for our aspiration of salvation, like nirvana or tarbadang tamjikye gofang. Yeah? It is irrelevant. And besides, he not only thought it is irrelevant, he thought it is detrimental. It is destructive. It hinders us to aspire and to achieve number dorwa or vimukti or tarba, release from samsara. So not only irrelevant, they are detrimental to our aspiration, salvific aspiration. I think scholars in the audience really know this. I mean, this is nothing new that I'm saying. When I say this, I think most of you might think of the famous analogy that is said to be given by the Buddha, the analogy of a man shot by a poisoned arrow. Just imagine a situation. Yeah, there is a person shot with a poisoned arrow, and we now start speculating. We start asking, where did the arrow come from which direction? What kind of clothes was the person wearing? In which direction did he disappear? Did he go? And so on. And he says, these questions are not relevant for saving this person's life. And before, if we at all can find all the answers to these questions, the person would have already been dead. And it has not brought anything. So he categorically rejected such speculative questions. And I think most of our living contemporary Buddhist masters immediately, I hope, they would immediately endorse and say, precisely, Buddha would have discouraged. So we can understand, we would understand if our contemporary Buddhist masters think that sometimes we do speculate as scholars, we do speculate a lot of things, and we propose many theories. They would find, is it really Buddhism? Is it really necessary? And we have to say, I as an academic would say, if your aim is really to achieve liberation, tarba, I think I often tell my students, please don't come to the university, go to a master, get necessary teachings, and do your practice and prepare, so to say, for your life next and the life after, or even for the tarba and tamjikemba. But some people are not satisfied by just going to by sitting at the feet of the master and getting some instructions. They really like to engage. They really like to think. They really like to speculate. In other words, sometimes we do go against our masters, against our teachers, in the sense that Lamas, my own teachers would say, I confess, like some of my teachers would say in Tibetan, "Kira shigo marwas." You don't have to die, right? What do they mean by this? Huh? You are speculating. You are studying things that are not relevant for relevant for your aspiration. I think I fully agree, my masters, but still, you see, there is something inside. One might call it in a nicer way. There is sort of a intellectual curiosity that drives you to ask these questions and seeks this, even if the questions are nonsensical or the answers are not purely speculative. You do want to sometimes ask these questions. Huh? But I hope to justify I hope to justify at least some of the attempts made by the academics to engage in the theoretical understanding of Buddhism, Buddhist doctrine, Buddhist history, especially intellectual and spiritual history of Buddhism or Buddhist cultures. So apparently it seems that in course of time, people did not stop thinking further, developing further. And the reality is that, look at Nagarjuna. Yeah? If you look at a few hundreds of years after the Buddha, we have Jinduk Chogni, and we have like numbers of philosophies. We have Semsambe, Semsamba philosophy. We have so-called Vaibhashika philosophy and Sautrantika, and Yogacara or Semsamba, and then we have Umapa, and later we even have Tantric philosophy and so on. How do we explain this? And this is not relevant if you want to simply practice, but for a student of history of ideas, I think there should be an attempt at least to explain how this developed, because we're interested, not because we disrespect Buddhism, but because we respect Buddhism and we want to know how things developed. I always give an example. One of the reasons why we have to be very interested in history, I must admit it, I was not so particularly interested in history when I was in the school, when I went to school, but later I think that history is all pervasive. Everything we talk, even like few things that we talk few seconds before now turns out to be embraced within history. So history is really pervasive. And so I emphasize the need to study history, particularly intellectual history. This is what I do. Of course, there are other forms of history. And this is because I want to know how things develop. Even if sometimes the development were not necessarily desirable. Sometimes there are undesirable developments in history. Yeah? And in this regard, I always remember one of my colleagues, a Tibetan colleague, he in one of his books, he said, denial of history is tantamount to denial of responsibility, which I find is a powerful statement. And I think all of us who are interested in a person, in an event, in a country, in a culture, in a philosophy should automatically be also interested in history. For example, I always give it as a person as an example. For example, I appreciate a certain master, or even let us say my father or mother. If I'm really interested in my father, I would also like to know where was he born, what did he do, how did he grow up, in what kind of a school did he go to school, like how was his childhood, how was his education. So this is quite natural to also knowing a person also means knowing the history or the background of that person. And with all the pluses and minuses. Of course, in the history, things could have not developed always according to our desires or according to our today's perspective. Things may have developed differently. But we have to accept, we have to recognize. I use the word, we have to cognize and recognize. We have to have the knowledge, and also we have to acknowledge that these have been. So, therefore, I think if we appreciate Buddhism, if we appreciate Buddhist philosophy, if we have some interest in Buddhist culture, then we would automatically also be interested how Buddhism developed, particularly how Buddhist philosophy developed. And the reality is that, of course, there is Buddhist philosophy. Yeah? We have to at least assume that we have different types of philosophy or philosophical directions or philosophical tendencies and philosophical thoughts and schools and systems. So in order to explain that, my teacher, now coming back to my teacher, he made a groundbreaking sort of a statement. Of course, his position, his theory theories have been questioned or criticized by his colleagues, later colleagues, but I think we still have to give serious consideration to what he proposed, just like his critics proposed. There are alternative views how to try to explain how Buddhist philosophy developed. And now this is important. He has maintained that unlike Greek philosophy, for example, unlike Greek philosophy, or unlike European philosophy, like Western European philosophy, or even to a greater extent, unlike non-Buddhist Indian philosophies, to a greater extent, it did not develop, this is very important, the Buddhist philosophy did not develop by way of pure speculation. It did not develop by just purely by thinking alone, but rather, he has suggested, it's very unique in a way in the history of Buddhism, that the Buddhist philosophies are outcome or results of generalizations of very specific experiences that certain Buddhist practitioners made during their meditative experience, during their meditative state. So, in other words, I give you this example because we have the so-called mind-only philosophy, right? Sem-sam. We have a philosophical system called Sem-sam, that everything is just mind. In a way, you can say Buddhist idealism. There is just the mind, and there are no entities such as stones, rocks, trees, and so on. And these are simply mind. Let us take this as an example. How did this philosophy develop? Apparently, scholars believe that this was not from the very outset taught by the Buddha, but it did develop in course of time. But how did and why did it develop? So, according to him, the first philosophical statement, such a statement that contains this philosophy, was made in a sutra, which is maybe in the 1st or 2nd century. And this, how do we know that? Because this sutra has been translated into Chinese. And interestingly, Chinese tradition always they date the translation, so we can know the latest age of this sutra is, so to say, when the Chinese translation was made. And there it is said, now just to give you a small background, this sutra deals with Sanjiji Sudampa, like recollecting or remembering the Buddha. We know, I mean, most of our scholars would know, Sanjiji Sudampa is like remembering the Buddha. And you can imagine, so there are certain practice where you try to visualize Buddha. Of course, everybody knows that Buddha is dead, long dead, gone. Especially in a very early, traditional, conservative form of Buddhism, Buddha, once he passes into the parinirvana, he is once and for all gone and becomes inaccessible to us. So we should not immediately have the Mahayana idea that Buddha is somewhere still residing. Now we are talking about a historical phase where it's pretty early, and at that phase of the development of Buddhism, people believe that Buddha, once gone, is gone forever. This is how nirvana is understood. It's like extinguishing fire. It's gone. You don't know where, but it's gone. And it becomes inaccessible to us. So this is how people believe. In order to compensate the psychological loss of the historical Buddha, Buddhists were kind of trying to regain somehow these experiences of having direct contact with the historical Buddha, their teacher. So one such attempt to regain Buddha as one's contact person, as a guide, as a teacher, is to recollect and to visualize him, Sanjiji Sudampa. And then the sutra says, if you practice for a long time, you start seeing him. You literally start seeing the Buddha in front of you. Of course, this guy is not insane. He suddenly now doesn't start believing that Buddha really is there in front of him. He thinks, oh, the Buddha that I see is simply my mind. So this is a very specific experiences that this monk makes during his meditative experience. But now when he wakes out of this meditative experience, he generalizes it. And he thinks, if the Buddha that I see in my meditative state is just my mind, then every phenomena that I see must also be my mind. So this is how you see a very specific context-bound experiences. He generalizes it and theorizes it and becomes a universal philosophy. Then he says, okay, the famous line is, Kam sumni sem sammo. If I remember correctly, Sanskrit is idam trai datukam, no, chitta matram. Like these three worlds, this world consisting of three world spheres are simply our mind. So this is according to him, this sutra is the first sutra where such a philosophy is outlined. And later on, we know there are hundreds of other sutras that says "Kam sumni sem sammo, kam sumni sem sammo," and so on. So you see. Therefore, I think we should not, even as a believer, you see, even as a staunch believer of Buddhism, when we try to understand the history of Buddhism, we should not have any fear or doubt that we are somehow showing disrespect to Buddhist philosophy and so on, because we're simply trying to understand how certain things developed. In fact, we're trying to explain how the Semsamba philosophy developed historically, and it doesn't mean that now somehow the scholar who studied this is trying to undermine the Semsamba. No, not at all. He's trying to understand and explain how this philosophy developed. So just to sum up what I'm trying to say. So according to him, a major part of Buddhist philosophy can be explained in this way. His theory, his position is that new philosophical theories can develop out of spiritual practices or meditation. So it's like philosophical theories developing on the basis of meditational practice. This is how it goes in this direction. But he has also tried to point out that the reverse process is also possible. That means sometimes new practices in Buddhism emerge as a result of new existing philosophies. Please protest if you think that it is kind of becoming too dry and abstract and unintelligible. Please protest. So yeah. So far clear. So sometimes new practices emerge as a result of already existing new philosophies. Just to give an example, I think all of us who are trying to understand Buddhism know that there is a practice called Dembangyarshashi. In Pali it's called Satipatthana, in Sanskrit called Smriti Upasthana, Dembangyarshapashi. That is Lu Dembangyarshapa. How do we concentrate on our own body and the body of others? Because in Buddhism, body is a challenge. How do we deal with my body and other people's body? How do we deal with an ugly body and a beautiful body, or a neutral body? These are all problems in terms of spirituality. If I see an ugly body, I get disgusted. If I see a beautiful body, I become attached. And if I see an uninteresting body, I just ignore. I'm totally disinterested. Yeah. So all of these are problems actually. So going this way, and this way. So and of course the biggest challenge, I must say, and just by the way, the biggest challenge for Buddhist spirituality is coping or dealing with our own ngenmongpa, like Decha, Shedang, Timo, Ngajil, Chad. I try to translate as intellectual, emotional defilements. Because there are certain intellectual components in the ngenmongpa, like not knowing, like moha, like disorientedness, confusion, like ignorance, and like doubt. And these are all somehow they should be subsumed under intellectual defilements or intellectual pollution. And then on the other side we have real emotional elements like hatred, jealousy, pride, arrogance, and so on. So these are like emotional and intellectual. But these are all defilements grouped together, and they are just simply called kleshas or ngenmongpas. And one of the challenges of Buddhist spirituality is indeed how do we tackle with our ngenmongpas. In fact, primarily with my own ngenmongpas. And so, one of the purposes of meditating or taking my own body and body of others as an object of meditation is precisely to combat my attachment to the body. So this is called Liu Dunbang, right? And the conservative, let us say, when I say conservative, or I don't mean in a pejorative way, okay? I mean in a very early, let us say original or early form of Buddhism. The conservative way of dealing with our body is to visualize it as disgusting. We know this, right? We know we have to visualize our body as if, or they would not agree if I say as if it were filthy, it were filled with 39 39 disgusting, ugly substances. And midupi dushigu, visualize our body undergoing the various stages of decomposition, like becoming red, dark blue, and green, and so on. So, but you see, these are meant with a specific purpose. This meditation has been prescribed. But then later, in few hundred years later, when the Mahayana emerges, they change this meditation, because it's now because the Mahayana has a new philosophy now, what we call maybe you can say illusionism, that everything is simply illusion, like illusory, jumada milam tabu, right? Everything is a tantric form of Buddhism. You are not supposed to meditate upon your body as disgusting. In fact, we are supposed to meditate upon a body as illusory and yet pure. Yeah? And because, why is it so? Because tantric philosophy, Buddhist tantric philosophy presupposes that everything is pure, including our body. So one should not be meditating upon our body as impure. So here, this is a case where a new practice emerged as a result of a new philosophy. So this is how he tries to show in two directions. So this is a small example how philosophy developed in Buddhism. There are many reasons, there are many factors, and there are many types of philosophy. But these are two examples of trying, which shows how, or which actually tries to explain how certain philosophies develop in Buddhism. I think I have posed this question: what is Buddhism? I haven't really answered this question yet, but I will try to answer this question before I go to devotionalism and rationalism. I try to answer this question: what is Buddhism? Of course, it is not a new question. It's nothing innovative. It's nothing new. But still, we can pose an old question: what is Buddhism? And I try to answer this question to use an anthropological terminology, both from an ethic perspective and an emic perspective. That is, both from insider's perspective and outsider's perspective. Insider's perspective, I mean Buddhist sources themselves, and that is emic. And ethic perspective, I mean from a modern Western academic perspective. First, from the ethic perspective, when I speak of modern Buddhist, I particularly think of a famous Belgian Buddhologist, Louis de la Villepoussin. He's well known, he's a well-respected scholar, and he has said that I think it was most of us were not born when he wrote this, when he gave a lecture and this is just simply a kind of a collection of his lectures, and he said Buddhism is a discipline of salvation. That's how he defined. It's a discipline of salvation. It's a discipline of how one achieves tarpa, or it's a discipline that concerns one's release from samsaric bondage. It's a very short, but I think it's I would say very powerful sort of definition and understanding of Buddhism. And my German teacher's teacher, he has also defined Buddhism in the same tone, in the same way. In German, he defined it as Erlösungslehre. It's a doctrine or teaching that concerns Erlösung. Erlösung means kind of again release from samsaric bondage. So most respected Buddhologists would agree that Buddhism is not about pure speculation. It is not simply theorizing, but it really concerns how you achieve Tarpa and Tamchikempa. And this is very much, in my view, very much conform with most Buddhist scholars and masters would say. There's no contradiction whatsoever. So this just to give you a taste of how well-respected Western Buddhologists think of Buddhism. And now to give some perspective, some, so to say, emic perspective, the insider's perspective, I think all of us know Dungel Dani Tamchita Dipkyun Selje Dambiche. That which eliminates Dungel, Dungel, it's not easy simply to translate as suffering. We have the temptation, just, okay, Dungel suffering. No, sometimes it can simply mean a very subtle pain. Sometimes it's really like a toothache. Yeah, this is a pain, this is suffering, dukkha. But sometimes it is simply a sort of, something unexplainable sort of a feeling that we sometimes have. Just imagine a situation. Maybe most of us have undergone such an experience. You have, for example, everything in your life. You have a good job, you have a good family, you have a good salary, you have a comfortable life, you have almost everything. You live in a beautiful country. But sometimes, somewhere you think, you feel still sad somehow. Something seems to be missing. There is a subtle sort of a dissatisfaction, discontentment. So Dungel also has this kind of a connotation. So it is too simplistic to simply translate dukkha as simply suffering. Of course, it encompasses suffering. Sometimes because I think the fact that we are discontent actually lies in the very fact that things that we like simply disintegrates. Suppose, let us say, you have a beautiful evening like today, and then, or you have a beautiful, dinner or whatever, and then if you just give a second thought, you think, oh, this is going to end soon. Everything is going to disperse, and everything is going to vanish. So this kind of a feeling gives you a sort of a subtle sort of a discontentment. So Buddhism, according to this famous line, Dungel Dani Tamchita Dipkin Selje Dambichu, that which eliminates Dungel, suffering, and also avaranas, dripa. Because you see, our mind, if we compare our mind to a water molecule, like pure elementary sort of a form, like H2O, and there are all kinds of adventitious polluting the water, right? But it's not really integrating or not really going into the elementary form H2O, but simply like making it toxic or dirty. So our mind is something like that. And so Buddhism is supposed to help us to simply purify that. So it's kind of a purifier. So actually these are linked. This suffering, I think dripa and suffering are somehow really intricately linked. If we are going to only experience pure state of mind, probably we will not experience suffering. So in short, it seems Buddhism is a kind of a technique or an antidote that helps us to purify and eliminate suffering and pollution. Our mental pollution. But I must say, this famous line, I haven't been able to identify its source. Of course, it's not important for practitioners, but as a scholar, I'm still curious. So much cited by everybody, but I still. So if you happen to discover the source, tell me. I'll acknowledge your help. I haven't been able to trace it, but it's a very famous line that everybody knows. There are similar, of course, statements, but not the precise line that I'm thinking about. In a similar tone, and there is a sutra called Maitreya Vyakarana, like Jamba Lungtempe Do. It is a sutra where Buddha, the future Buddha Maitreya, is supposed to be prophesied. So in Maitreya Vyakarana Sutra, it is also in a similar tone. This is said, Damche, Sadharma, Dambiche. Of course, we know that we have to make a subtle distinction, Che and Dambiche, Dharma and Sadharma. Usually, Buddhist sources consider its teachings as Sadharma. And this word Sat is often interpreted in two ways. One is really true, like a true Dharma, but one is also like kind of a good, or even sometimes something that abides, that enduring or a permanent, almost eternal kind of a Dharma. So it is a self-designation. The Buddhist sources designate its religion because there is no, of course, as you can imagine, the word Buddhism is, some scholars even discourage to use the word Buddhism, and saying that these are big words, we have to stop using this word, big word. Of course, it's just a convention, and what we mean by Buddhism, we simply mean the teaching that is ascribed to the Buddha, and often the Sanskrit word Bauddha is used, Sangyepa, Sangyepiche. So those teachings of the Bauddha, the Buddhist, these are Buddhism. So it's just a convention. So we should not shy. I think we should not shy or refrain from. We should not stop using the word Buddhism. It's just for convention, and so long as we understand what it means, it's okay, I think. And famously, there is and all of us know there is a famous work by Nagarjuna Gomboludrup called Ratnavali, Rinchen Tawa. So there he defines Dambiche as almost in a similar way, Dungil Tamje Zebe Che, he said. So that teaching that causes the extinction or cessation of all sufferings. So literally, Buddhism itself sees Buddhist teaching as simply a medicine to cure all this dungel. Yeah? That's it. It's very simple, actually. So actually, I may just sneak into some of my personal thoughts. So you see, if you understand Buddhism in this way, I think Buddhists have no concern to worry with intolerance or liberal thinking and so on, because in theory, any teaching that help us to eliminate or reduce our pain and suffering, we should be able to accept it, because this is precisely how Buddhism is understood, right? As a kind of an antidote to minimize or to reduce or even to eliminate suffering. So in other words, we have to see whether the medicine is effective or not. Not because it is Buddhist or non-Buddhist, but because it works. It helps sentient beings. It relieves the pain and suffering of sentient beings. So this is how Buddhism is defined in Ratnavali, and also in this Maitreya Vyakarana, and this unidentified source, which is very famous. There's a slightly different definition of Buddhism or a Buddhist teaching in a work called Samgi Michabar Töpa, Achintya Stava. It is ascribed to the famous Nagarjuna. Maybe we need not go into the problematics, the problems of the authorship, who this Nagarjuna is, but never mind. And there is a work called Achintya Stava, like Samgi Michabar Töpa. It's a kind of a eulogy or a praise, like in praise of the inconceivable, that is ascribed to one Nagarjuna. And there it is said that teachings that help us to uproot or eliminate all ideologies or views. And you would say, why is ideology so problematic? You would think, right? And my students would be fed up of me because I keep on repeating this. I used German word. One German word is Ansicht. Ansicht means view, like ideological view. And Einsicht, of course I'm playing with the word, Ansicht and Einsicht. Ein is in, like insight. And Ansicht is sort of a view. But you see, in Buddhism, just as in German language, Ansicht are not necessarily or often evaluated negatively. They are considered not so good. And particularly, if you have seen His Holiness the Dalai Lama giving teachings, you would, or like in opening some of teaching session, you would often see Tawa Thamchin Pangzeba Gautam de la Chakselo. So this is attributed to Nagarjuna. I pay my respect or obeisance to Gautama, to the Buddha, who has eliminated all ideologies, who have eliminated all views. Why would one eliminate all one's views, right? So apparently something is wrong in the views according to Buddhism. So in other words, it's true. If you read Buddhist sources, you would say, oh, this and this guy had 360 different views. It's kind of ideologies. So according to this work, Buddhism is supposed to help us remove all our ideologies, all our views. But instead, no, it doesn't mean that now we become totally blank. In this place, we are supposed to have direct insight into the reality. We see things as they are. We don't construct ideologies in our head, but we see things as they are. So there is a beautiful saying, there is a beautiful expression used by the famous Tibetan master Sakya Pendita, and also later on also by famous Nyingma master Mipham Namgyal Jamso. They use the expression Sangye dang drutop gongpachik. Sangyes, in Sanskrit it is nice because we can play with the words Siddhas and the Buddhas. Because the Buddhas are the awakened ones, and Siddhas were the accomplished ones. And they use the word Sangye dang drutop gongpachik. The Sangyes and Siddhas and Buddhas are of one intent. They are in one line, so to say. Why? So such a state where Buddhas and Siddhas come together, they coincide, is only possible if we presuppose a direct insight into the reality. Then suppose if all of us in this room share the same insight in the reality, we would not debate at all with regard to that reality, because this is called automatic consensus. There would be an automatic consensus among us, and to use a Buddhist terminology, we would say, all our differences, all our controversies, all our debate and dissents would automatically resolve in the direction of the Dharma. That's what it is. That means, so you see, our world, especially if you think our today's world, yeah, every country, every people, every person have a very strong, radical views. And we would not budge from our strong, radical, destructive views, right? And the Buddha would have said, we should eliminate all of these. What do we need instead is we need an insight. What we need instead of Ansicht, we need Einsicht, right? And maybe in our Chökye term, it would be Yeshe. I think what I mean by Sherab, it could either be Sherab or it could be Yeshe. So we don't need Tawa, so therefore Buddha is someone who has given up all the Tawas, but instead Buddha has Yeshe. So when the Buddhas and Siddhas had the same Yeshe, they see the same reality. And there is no controversy, there's no differences. All the controversies, all the differences resolve automatically. So this seems to be the purpose of the Buddha Dharma, actually. This is really like from an intellectual point of view, not simply an elimination of our emotional defilements, but rather like getting right at the core of the problem. I remember once having given a talk in the Ati Foundation, and I remember having said that, and this is also one of my favorite idea that I get from one famous Indian Buddhist philosopher called Chugyakpa Dharmakirti, and in his seminandal, in his magnum opus on logic and epistemology, he has said positive emotions such as love, affection, compassion, and so on. These are very noble emotions. They say, no matter how positive they are not capable of uprooting the cause of the cause of suffering. Why? And in a very typical way, he answers, because they do not stand in direct contradiction to the root of samsara. Emotions do not, like compassion, is not an antidote of dagme tokpa, like proper understanding. Right? So, therefore, maybe some of you may find it problematic, but I still would like to formulate in this way: salvation, that the final spiritual breakthrough in Buddhism is not an emotional sort of event. It doesn't happen as a result of our positive emotions or something like that, but it rather happens. It is rather an intellectual or a kind of a cognitive event. It's not an emotive or emotional, but rather cognitive. That means you understand it, and then the root of the samsara is cut. Otherwise, just developing compassion alone, we can for an eternity develop compassion, but we can still stick around in samsara. Why? Because compassion is extremely important, yeah. But what this also tries to say is that compassion alone can never, ever uproot the cause of samsara. So, in other words, in a positive way, we can say, actually, compassion is compatible with samsara. So I like the word, actually, compassion, because compassion is a passion, is a kind of passion. It's a very special kind of passion. So I think bodhisattvas, Jangchub Sempa, they deliberately sometimes retain some of the passions so that they can be in a samsara and try to help some samsaric beings. So to summarize, the final spiritual breakthrough in Buddhism happens in a form of a cognitive event and not as an emotional one. And this is very crucial. And in order to support this statement, I may even refer to one famous Tibetan scholar, from the 11th century Tibetan scholar called Wangchuk Zangbo, and he has stated, from the Shravakayana, from the lowest Buddhist vehicle until the Dzogpa Chimbo, they share one view in the sense that you never get liberation until you see the reality. So that means seeing the reality and getting liberation is shared by all, according to him, by all Buddhist systems. Beginning from the very beginning, like Shravakayana,